What's up everybody and welcome back to the channel. In this video for the First Descendant today, we are back to looking at Luna. About a week and a half to 2 weeks before season 3 dropped, I made a build video for this Descendant where I used one of her Transcendent mods to essentially turn her into an AoE mobbing powerhouse. Now, with the release of season 3, there have been some new things which were added to the game, namely trigger modules. And this kind of like propels her into the best possible version of an AoE mobber from her specifically that we've seen yet in this game. Now, since we're all kind of like trapped in Axion planes at the moment trying to farm these missions as much as possible, of course the idea is to have Descendants that can do these activities very fast, very efficiently. You don't die a lot, you deal a lot of damage, and you're able to kill massive amounts of enemies super fast. Of course, also having an AoE Descendant that can do things like Sigma and 400% in dungeons and that sort of stuff is also good. And this is really where Luna absolutely shines. So despite the fact that I think she's a massive turnoff due to the way her mechanic works and that it's essentially a rhythm-based game, like you're playing fucking Guitar Hero or whatever on her while you play, if you are able to go or look past that, and I really do, I'm crying in controller here for my console brethren who have to do this shit like on PlayStation or Xbox or whatever, or for instance people that end up playing this on PC with controller. My god, why would you do that to yourself? The point is that I do understand that it is I would say a frustrating character to play compared to certainly the meta, which it requires you to do far less to achieve similar results, or in some cases better results. The bottom line is that she deals a shitload of damage, super easy to play once you get your head around this whole node mechanic, and you kind of like just glide through all the enemies and murder them the fuck out. So it's definitely an additional option that's available to you in the game to do this type of content. And since we're going to be doing this for the, I don't know, foreseeable future to like December or January or some shit, you might as well give yourself more options to essentially do this. That was kind of like the reason I did this as well. I've been focusing recently on, let's say, less played Descendants, and Luna is definitely that, but she should definitely not be overlooked. She absolutely fucking fries enemies once you build her correctly, and I'm going to show you how. Let's check it out. So if I just go over here. Okay, so starting us off, first things first, if you are familiar with my prior video on Luna, then there's not going to be a whole lot of different stuff. However, for people that haven't seen that video, we're just going to kind of like gloss through some of the basics of Luna and also just some of the reasons why we built her that way. Now, the first thing that is worth mentioning is that we are also building her crit centric. So when you build skill-based Descendants crit, a lot of your modules are kind of like chosen for you already because you want to just kind of like boost your critical hit rate as well as your critical hit damage as high as you possibly can. And that's kind of like why so many of your modules are tied in already. So just starting us off right off the rip, before we get into all of that drama, is the point is that you need this noise surge mod. Now, by default, if we just go ahead and take this off, you'll notice that, I mean, Luna is a support Descendant, and she's kind of like, her main thing is the ability to boost the damage of her compatriots, the other Descendants that are with you. However, she does have a mod called Noise Surge, which then allows you to essentially turn your 3 note skills into damage dealing AoEs. Now, each one of these 3 notes, they deal the same amount of damage, but each one of them gives you a different buff. The first one gives you a buff to your skill critical hit rate. The second one gives you a buff to your skill critical hit damage. And then lastly, the fourth note, or the fourth skill rather, or the third note, gives you a skill power modifier increase. So the point is that you should be not just using one note the whole time. You should definitely weave them in. They are really good rotations to get the maximum DPS out of it. But if you're like a lazy fucking person, like I am mostly, what you can also do is just do a full rotation of the second note until you get the dance, sort of like animation where you're like jumping around on your disc and riding around, where you're just dealing AoE damage on a tick basis. And then you'll get the buff, and then you'll do a full rotation of your critical hit damage, and at that point you're dealing a massive amount of damage because these buffs start overlapping because they have a duration that they're live on your character for. And then for your third rotation, you do the skill power modifier increase. Now, during the third rotation, your skill crit hit rate will probably fall off, and then you kind of like just refresh from there again. That's pretty much the kind of like the way that I do it by default. Again, like I said, it's a very easy thing just to get your memory into, and you kind of like just do it that way. That's it. It sounds more complicated than it is because it does sound more complicated than it is, but it's really not all that bad. So specifically when it comes to the modules, and right at the beginning here, I'm just going to leave it open like this. If somebody just wants to screenshot this, then feel free to do so. But basically you want to do your 2 blue mods, which both give critical hit rate and critical hit damage, and then you want to do your 2 purple mods, which also both give critical hit rate and critical hit damage in different, you know, priorities. One gives more critical hit rate and one damage, and the other one gives more damage and less hit rate. That's emergency measures and front lines. So those 4 mods are an auto lock in because we are building crit centric, so we want that to be kind of like the star of the ability now, or the Descendant rather. Now at this point in time, things start to sort of deviate with Luna, and that's because generally speaking, if you build skill based Descendants, a very, very important stat that you oftentimes needs to build into or lean into heavily is skill cooldown. Because since skill cooldowns are the main way for you to deal damage, you want them available as much as possible. I think it makes complete sense. So in that case, we would have to devote a bunch of module slots to skill cooldown. However, skill cooldown is not important to Luna at all, and that's because her notes, you'll see her second, her third, and her fourth ability have 0.0 second cooldowns. And that means as long as you are hitting the notes and not missing notes, more on this later, but as long as you are hitting the notes, the skill cooldown does fuck all for you, because the notes are always available, and every time you hit a note on the timing of the Guitar Hero mechanic, you are dealing damage. And you can switch these notes in between. You can go 2-3-4, 2-3-4, 4-4-2, whatever the fuck you want to do. You can do that, but skill cooldown does nothing for you. All right. However, if you miss a note, and you'll notice down there near the bottom it says on note failure cooldown, you have a 10-second cooldown. So if you were to stack cooldown reduction, the only effect it would do for you is it would give you less cooldown if you fuck up and miss a note. But we're just not going to do that. So we don't miss notes. And so if you don't do that, then skill cooldown is not important to you. And more importantly, there's 2 mods in the game that you can put in now, since you don't give a fuck about cooldown, that's actually going to elevate your damage quite significantly. These 2 mods are Maximize Skill, which says skill power plus 87.6%, and then it gives you an additional 50% of skill cooldown. So it takes your skill cooldown on a missed note from 10 seconds to 15 seconds, and then Maximize Power, which is skill power modifier plus 96.1, and this also gives skill cooldown plus 50%. So this then makes that if you fuck up and miss a note, you're going to wait not 10 seconds but 20 seconds for that note to come back. Now we're not perfect, so sometimes you do miss a note. The good thing is there's 2 other notes that you can hit while you wait for those other notes, the other note that you fucked up on, to come back. So the only real problem here is if you like putting finger this shit and you mess up on all 3 notes, because then you're going to be knocked out of your damage for a significant amount of time, and that's not great. But we're not going to do that. We know what we're doing over here. The next thing that you want to do is you want to increase the range. Okay, the range is super important because you're doing AoEs, so those AoEs need to be bigger so that you hit more enemies at once. I think it's self-explanatory. So skill expansion is good for us here because that's 92.3% of additional skill effect range, and then I slap in amplification control on top of that as well, which is an additional 51.7%. And this will range cap us. So now we're good on range, and we're dealing damage at the maximum amount of range. This gives us a little bit of maximum shield as well, though, but you know, that's not really important. Then the other thing that is also good for us is duration. Now duration, once again, does fuck all for your notes. Your notes play, they AoEs, they fire off on the beat of the music, that's it. But what duration does do for us is it increases the amount of time that the buff per note is available on her, and the longer you can have that duration be, the more overlap you will have, where you have your crit hit rate buff going, and you have your crit hit damage buff going, and you have the third buff going, right? So by default this duration is 14.5 seconds, but with some duration mods or mod added in, we can take this all the way up to 21.3 seconds, which is very comfortable, and there you will see some overlap in your buffs. Now we can do this by just putting in skill extension, which is skill duration plus 36.5%, and that's basically it. Now that leaves us with 1 mod that we haven't looked at yet, and you can put non-attribute Syncytium in there. See this as your flex slot. So I put this in here because it gives me more non-attribute skill power, but if you, for instance, get murdered a lot or something like that for some reason, even though in the footage you can see that yes, we are sort of threading the needle sometimes in a gunfight, in action planes, There's tons of health pickups and stuff like that, and by just, you know, moving through the battlefield and paying attention, you can kind of like stay out of trouble, I would say, for 99% of the time. Of course, if you stand around in AoEs and shit like that, you are going to get cooked, but, you know, that's true for any Descendant. But yes, with this slot, you could put in more HP if you want to. You could go even more into duration if you want to, anything like that. But I found this to be, in my opinion, the best setup. And again, like I said, not much has changed from that previous video. The only addition now is El Trigger Modulino over here. So when I had finally picked up what I consider the best version of Power Beyond that I've gotten yet, automatically my first thought was, dude, I cannot wait to throw this into fucking Luna, because this additional 15% is going to take her really, really sick AoE damage, or that which is already like stinky, to like the next level, like proper fucking stink, right? And it does. It does. It is a fairly decent damage bump. By putting Power Beyond in there, you're seeing a pretty big jump in numbers. However, there is a better mod for you to use. And in the background right now, you should see me doing some tests where I'm essentially comparing Power Beyond in the lab to another mod called Gap in Time. Now, Gap in Time, essentially how this mod works is it's relatively simple. Basically, and I'm sorry guys, I didn't explain Power Beyond because by now, this deep into Season 3, everybody's using Power Beyond. So I don't think I need to explain it, but bottom line is Power Beyond gives you a flat skill power increase. So if you have a max rolled one like I have here, you're getting 15% just flat skill power across the board, right? Gap in Time, on the other hand, says that when you hit an enemy with a normal AoE type skill, which is all of our shit, you deal additional damage. Now, this additional damage trigger rate is inversely proportional to the caster's current skill cooldown reduction. What that means is the more skill cooldown reduction you have, the slower Gap in Time will fire off this additional damage. So inversely proportional to that, if you have zero skill power, skill cooldown reduction, this thing is going to fire at its maximum rate. And the amount that you can roll is the additional damage percentage, which in my case, I have a near perfect one, which is 34%. So this produces a quite a bit more additional damage over Power Beyond. So if you have, I would say, it's difficult for me to say where the cutoff point is. I think Power Beyond is really, really good across the board if you have a decently rolled Power Beyond. But once you get to about 30% additional damage from Gap in Time, so if you get a 30% and up, Gap in Time is going to overshadow that damage and actually be a lot better. So yeah, I tested both of these, in the lab, but also just in the field and using it. And originally with my testing, it kind of like one of the things was I was looking at the total amount that my AoEs were firing off, and they were less. And I was like, okay, well, dude, Power Beyond is just always going to be the best fucking mod on every single skill power Descendant. But then when I tested it in the lab just to make sure, then I started saying, but wait a minute, there's an additional damage which you don't often see in the field because it's gray and it's in the background that's firing off. And that's where a lot of this additional damage is actually stacking in, and where Gap in Time is actually superior. So absolutely throw Gap in Time in there. This is the one case where I would say don't use Power Beyond, because Gap in Time is just basically superior. Next up, we can talk about weapons, or we don't have to, because weapon choice doesn't really matter. We don't carry any stat sticks or anything like that. The most important thing is that whichever weapon you have in your hand is actually mounted on your reactor. We're going to look at reactors just now. So that's pretty much it if you want the full damage. I, however, use this Descendant pretty much as my weapon leveling Descendant, since her damage is not really dependent on the weapon. And even in situations where if you're doing 400% infiltrations or Sigma, you don't even need to be matched up with your reactor. You can lose that 60% of damage and you'll still absolutely flatten the fucking enemy. So it's all good. So, but if you are trying to obviously hit your maximum tippy top damage numbers, then obviously make sure that the reactor that you have has the correct mounting on it. So let me just quickly move us over here so we can continue the discussion. So the reactor of choice for us here is Materialized Singularity. That's because it is a non-attribute singular, and that is because once you slap Noise Surge into Luna, it changes her damage nodes, her AoEs, into non-attribute singular skills. So that's the reactor we're looking for. In terms of your substats, you can juice more damage up, for sure. You can go into more non-attribute skill power here. You can go into more crit damage here. You can go into more singular. You can stack damage stats into your substats, and that's going to be just fine. However, in my case, I ended up opting for skill effect range because this, alongside the other things that I have on the character, is how I hit my range cap. And I went skill duration up because this, alongside the one duration mod that I have there, gives me the more than 20 seconds duration that I want on my buffs for the 3 nodes, and so therefore that's good. So this is still not the most powerful version of the build in terms of like just raw damage numbers, but this reactor gives me the utility that goes alongside that damage that pretty much makes me feel happy. In terms of external components, it's a no-brainer. We're using Enlightened Mage because Enlightened Mage is such a massive boost to our non-attribute skill power. Once you hit 3 stacks in Truth, you get 84% additional non-attribute skill power, which is fucking ginormous. And so you'll hit this consistently because of the fact that each time you press a note, it counts as a non-attribute skill. In other words, you pretty much hit that three skill cap like super fast, and then basically you're just singing from there. Now, in terms of your mods that you put into your external components, you want to go max HP and defense. We have not stacked in any survivability mods in this, and I'm fine with this. I often get questions about this because people will look down here and they'll be like, yo, dude, that's 6,500 HP. What the fuck? Like, how are you surviving in Axiom Plains? First things first, I'd urge you to give it a try. You'll be surprised how durable you are because you're also sitting with 40k defense. But through the correct use of inversion reinforcements, as well as just paying attention to the ground, and when you do see yourself dipping a little bit, just picking up a red brick, you're going to be just fine. So you do want to go max HP and defense. So at the very least on those 4 pieces, you have those 4 stacked. Now, Enlightened Mage's base stats on the external components themselves are kind of like all over the place. And that's one of the reasons why, even though we stack max HP and defense on our mods, you still kind of like don't have that much because we have max shield on one, we have max HP on one, we have defense on one, and we have max shield. So we like 2 of our pieces, possibly if you want to be that way, 3 of our pieces are shit, and they would be great if all of them have max HP on them, but they don't, so it is what it is. Now, in terms of your substats on these external components, it's the bog standard setup for a skill-based Descendant. So you want MP recovery out of combat and max HP on your first piece. On your sensor, you want max MP and MP recovery in combat. On your memory, you want defense and MP recovery modifier. And then last but certainly not least, on your processor, kind of nobody gives a shit. You could have toxic, because poison in this game is always shit. So you could have toxic resistance on there if you want. I have max shield recovery modifier on here. Your processor kind of like doesn't matter. It is what it is. It's fine. Then when we move over to our Arche Tuning, because we're not pushing into skill cooldown yet, it gives us quite a bit of additional points that we can goof around with, and that's good because we want to stack skill critical hit rate and skill critical hit damage. So as usual, we dip down here, we get ourselves some cost reduction, we get ourselves some range, we get ourselves some additional damage here in the gold, we go all the way up here, and then here we peel off to the side and we get ourselves the critical hit rate and the critical hit damage nodes on the side here. We also veer here to the right, we get ourselves more skill power, and we go for our mutant cell, and the one that we're using is non-attribute cohesion. This is just a boost to when you defeat an enemy, it increases your non-attribute cohesion, which is a buff that essentially gives you more non-attribute skill power, and it can stack 3 times. And since this is basically all you're doing the entire time because you're mobbing in AoE content, you are going to have this buff up all the time, and it's just going to give you additional, yum. So all of this together, this Arche Tuning board here is going to be kind of like your best, skill critical hit rate and skill critical hit damage. That's tough to say super fast, but I think I'm somehow managing it. You're going to be sitting with a base of just under 51% skill critical hit rate and a 4 times skill critical hit damage multiplier. And then of course, when those buffs come in from your 2nd, your 3rd, and your 4th node, you're going to hit the caps on that, and that's where a lot of your like sick damage is going to come from. Last but not least, let's talk inversion reinforcements. Now, in the case of inversion reinforcements, again, with skill power Descendants, generally speaking, you kind of like always go for arc circulation tactic because this is a skill cooldown minus 24% for 10 seconds buff. It's kind of like too good not to pick up. Again, skill cooldown for us is nada important. We don't give a shit about that. So that frees up this slot. We don't have to take that thing. So what I end up taking is selective neurostimulation, which can solve any MP related issues we might be experiencing, but in my experience with this build, that's not really a problem. We pick up shield particle reconfiguration, which says when hit by an enemy, it grants you shield particle reconfiguration. This is a buff that gives you defense plus 10% and max shield plus 2.5% per 2.5%, sorry, per 2,500 defense for 15 seconds. We have like 40k defense, so that's a pretty significant boost that we get. And this is a great way for us to essentially just get some additional survivability, because you are in the thick of things with this, right? You are on your disc fucking blowing your music, and as you like running past enemies, they're gonna melee you, they're gonna fucking shoot you, they're gonna jump on you, all that stuff. So you are going to be taking a lot of damage. So anything that can help you, deal with that is, good shit. This is also for 15 seconds, and then has then it has a 20-second cooldown. So its uptime is quite significant, and you can sort of like time it in between waves and stuff like that. So yeah. Last but not least, I grabbed deploy resonance device down here. Most importantly, the thing is just that you do want quantum domain, because this is just an additional way. So if you want to change some of the other mods where I was going for range, this is another way for you to get range, but also to get more damage in the form of skill power. So just another sort of like bump for us in the right direction in terms of like a damage profile. And that's going to be it for the video. Thank you so much for watching, especially if you made it this far. Let me know in the comments down below if there's any additional questions or anything like that specifically on this build. Even though it's on a Descendant that is considered not straightforward, I feel it's a very straightforward build in the sense of like you can very easily wrap your head around the fact that the timing mechanic, and once you have that down, my one, I suppose, issue that I have with the build is you end up looking at that bottom part of the screen predominantly and not so much around. And for new players, this might be extremely jarring because you're not looking at your surroundings. So you might be running into pillars and falling off edges and fucking getting stuck on geometry and stuff like that. But once you start getting to know the missions, the areas and things like that, and especially if you've been playing the game for a while, then there's a certain amount of muscle memory that settles in where you can kind of like just navigate your way around this shit fucking blindfolded. And in a way, this is like playing blindfolded, because you're kind of like just looking at that little clutch of notes down there. I apologize for the quality of my voice. I have once again been struck down by disease. My 2-year-old is the gift that keeps on giving when it comes to bringing new and exciting Germans back to the house for me to sample. But I think it is okay. I think I managed to mute most of the coughs. But yeah, but again, thank you for watching. I appreciate it. Do keep watching. Lots more guides coming this week and the week thereafter and the week thereafter and so on and so forth. But as always, until next time, fucking cheers.